So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Melli Namalai. I've been with Asha for a long time. I think probably getting close to around 20 years now. Since I was in school, I've been involved with Asha. I primarily am volunteer with the Asha Boston chapter. I just added a note about being part of the core team in the past, kind of just to highlight that my experiences have included projects beyond the Boston chapter. So I thought of this topic for this series because when we had the Asha 28 conference in Chicago earlier this year, one of the volunteers asked what I thought was a valid question: what are the challenges of education in India? I think was the way she put it. And it then occurred to me that folks like me have been doing this for a while, but for newer volunteers, it might be good to just give an overview of what are the challenges, like why does Asha need to exist? So that kind of inspired this presentation. And feel free to ask questions and so on. So let's take a step back and kind of look at who funds school education, right? And not just in India, but across the world, where education is important for any society. I think that's a given and that is accepted. So who would support it? Because for education, you need infrastructure, you need teachers, you need materials. So big part of this, in most countries, it turns out, this is funded by taxpayer money. In other words, the government funds it in some form or the other. Like in the United States, as you may know, education is funded mostly through property taxes of that area, so it's very local. Different countries do it differently. And then parents, which means you are just looking at private kind of schools, so parents pay fees and the school runs. So that would be a completely private model. No taxpayer money coming in, completely funded by the parents of the child going to school. And then there are, of course, charitable organizations which support education. Everything from religious to specialized education to new types of education models and all of that. The interesting thing is all developed countries, like pretty much all of the OECD countries, have a very strong public education system, starting from the United States to Europe to Singapore to South Korea, and then Canada, across the world. Developed countries have a very strong public education system funded with taxpayer money. And this has helped, I believe, fuel the economies also, that you need an educated workforce to help your economy. So in the industrialized world, this is a given, that education has to be funded. It has to be a public resource. And this is the interesting thing is that in India, it's people seem to look at it differently, which is why I'm kind of highlighting that so many countries in the world have a strong public education system, meaning funded by the government or taxpayers' money in some way. So what happens in India? The spending on education is roughly 3% of GDP. There have been attempts to make it 6%. There have been attempts to kind of increase that. Asha itself was part of a campaign like 10 years ago or something to try and double it to 6%. The US, just to give some other comparison numbers, US is around 7.3%. Other OECD countries are at around 6.3%. But that being said, yes, 3% could be increased, but I'm not going there right now. I'm just saying, okay, given the fact that we have 3% of the GDP spent on education by the government, which itself is in absolute terms, it's a pretty big number. What does it mean? So I wanted to look at some of the different types of government schools that are run. Central government schools. There are many different subsystems. I'm just listing a few. The Kendriya Vidyalaya system, some of you might have attended a Kendriya Vidyalaya school. These are central government-run schools across the country. I believe they were set up to help central government employees who would move from place to place and be transferred. So the idea was that the children could have like a uniform access to the same curriculum and so on. NCRT schools. I myself am a product of NCRT schools. I think I paid like ₹1 of tuition every month. It was an excellent school. These are set up, NCRT runs teacher training institutions. These schools provide like a laboratory for their new education methodologies and so on. And then there's Navodaya Vidyalaya, which was created maybe that was 20 years ago. And there's one in every district, not all districts, but most districts. Those are pretty good too, by all accounts. So I'm also, not only these are central government run schools, these are generally good systems. Other examples of publicly run education institutions are, of course, the well-renowned IITs. They're all public institutions. So I'm just kind of also highlighting the government can run good schools. And then we have state government run schools. And this typically covers the widest number of students. It is a responsibility of the state government to ensure that there is a school in every remote corner of the state. The rural schools that we talk about, the rural schools in villages, they are typically funded by the state government. Some states have begun to build on the Vidyalaya and the Navodaya Vidyalaya to create what they call others Vidyalaya in different taluks in different districts, and they actually tend to be pretty good for various reasons. Why they're good is interesting. One, there's funding is one issue. Second, they do have a selection process. They don't just take everybody in. They take some students. They have a test. So I think that filters out the students who are not doing well at that point in time. So for that and various other reasons, they tend to be good schools. Large cities have their own systems, like the city corporation schools. Mysore, where I'm from, has a Mysore City Corporation set of schools. And they tend to be very poor in quality. And similarly, the state government-run schools outside of the others Vidyalaya and for specialized interventions tend to have a lot of challenges, and we'll look at a few of that. So people sometimes ask me, what's the structure of an education department? I just wanted to kind of talk about the bureaucracy a little bit. So you're the education minister, every state has an education minister, all the schools are under this education minister, and then there's an education secretary, and then there's a whole level of people like here. There's an undersecretary, and all kinds of people under that. And then there are district education officers. This is usually one for every district in the state. And then within the district, the administrative regions are blocks. So there's a block education officer. And when an Asha project partner tries to work with a government school, we tend to interact mostly with the BEO, with the block education officer, because that's the first level government official that you're interacting with. Anyway, here's the whole education bureaucracy, and all of this is investment, right? I mean, all of these are paid salaries, and all of these folks are trying to do something with education. So there's like so much infrastructure there. This is also what I wanted to highlight. So what is the problem, right? We have some schools, I mentioned city corporation schools are not good, some rural schools are not good. So what really is the problem? Not just for the government schools, but let's look at what are the problems in general. Infrastructure. Is infrastructure the problem? Infrastructure was the problem 20 years ago when I began volunteering for Asha. We would go, I have visited a lot of government schools with dilapidated structures, and it was a problem. It has really improved though. Okay, now I'm going to talk mostly Karnataka, where I used to work projects Karnataka and some in Tamil Nadu, but my experience with government school system is mostly in the Karnataka region. And it's really improved. They have really done a good job fixing stuff. Schools are painted, schools are much better. There are toilets. I have used the toilets when visiting these remote schools, and I mean, they're functioning. And as the probe report from a while back mentioned, now there's a physical primary school structure within 1 kilometer of more than, I believe it's actually 95% of all students in India, which is an achievement. I mean, there's actually a primary school structure within 1 kilometer of like over 90% of all children in India. I mean, that, given the scale that this has to be at, that is quite an achievement. And blackboards, and there are all kinds of government schemes to have like nice painted walls with like animals and whatnot, right? I mean, they are more cheerful places than they used to be, and I've seen this change over the last 20 years. So is the problem teachers? So I would actually say the infrastructure, at least in the southern states, is not one of the major problems. So then question is the problem teachers. I mean, definitely, I think teachers, we have a more significant problem when it comes to teachers. One, there are a lot of vacant positions, and this varies a lot. Karnataka has some vacant positions. If you look at Bihar, you'll find more vacant positions. There are vacant positions, and even the teachers who are appointed, they tend to want to concentrate in schools near the city. So you'll find city corporation schools with a lot of teachers, but you'll find that if you go into rural areas, you'll start having only 1 or 2 teachers for the whole school because there'll be vacancies, because teachers will get transferred. This system is highly politicized, highly corrupt, and not always. Karnataka is not that corrupt. It's more political connections, but you're always trying to get transferred to a school in a bigger city because you want to live in a bigger city. You want your kids to benefit from the amenities of the bigger cities and so on. So that is an issue. The vacant positions and all of that is an issue. The last is like the one to highlight is teaching quality. Teaching quality is also an issue, and I have a couple of slides coming up on that. So I think teaching quality is one of the biggest issues, again, in the southern states. The third, I would say, pillar when you talk about a school, you have infrastructure, you have teachers, and then who is going to oversee all of this? Community oversight. This is where I think India has not done very well. Like I was showing earlier, the big bureaucracy that we have. We have so many administrators from the minister on down, but it's very top down. It's very top down, and they are the only ones who have any kind of oversight. There is no community involvement. Like again, in the United States, you have the school boards. This is an elected school board. These elections are sometimes hard fought, often includes parents. That is really not there, and they've tried to do this. There are laws have been passed, schemes have been created to train the community in having oversight on the school, but for the most part, poorly implemented. So because of this, and because of the teacher vacancy problems, and because of the community oversight, and because of teaching quality problems, the government schools have gotten a really bad rap. Even though the infrastructure is, I would say, pretty good at this point in time, again speaking for states I'm familiar with, the other problems mean that the system has really suffered in many ways. So it has. So government school systems are completely declining in popularity, and I'll show some numbers, I think, in the next slide. So just to kind of dwell a little bit on the teacher quality and the quality of education. I said infrastructure is good. For the most part, in elementary schools, yes. In high schools, you have things like lack of labs. There usually is no sports ground or sports equipment at all. Lack of labs I'm more familiar with because of the projects I'm working with. And textbooks are provided free by the government, but they're usually delayed. Like they don't arrive in June, they'll arrive in September and October, so 2-3 months have been lost. And virtually no libraries at all. Schools have no libraries. I do not know of any government school that has a decent library in Karnataka or Tamil Nadu. Maybe the city ones have some books in them. So effectively in rural areas, the only book available for a child is a textbook. So you can imagine that is not conducive for learning at all. And rote memorization is the norm. As we know, there's so much emphasis on memorizing content and regurgitating facts. And the SLC exam also kind of has become like that. You have this guidebook that as long as you follow all the previous year's question papers, you can do well in class 10. And that has really become very systematized now. It's very, very hard to break free from that. And what we end up having is children who don't have critical thinking skills. And this we are beginning to see is also impacting in Karnataka. I can totally see how it has impacted the teaching profession itself. So if you look at 20 years ago, the teachers now who are teaching today probably were in the school system 20 years ago. So they went to the same school, they memorized in school. They finish the school and they go and get their BEd or DEd degrees. What happens in those teacher education colleges? Once again, memorization. They will have all of these nice words around, yes, this is joyful learning, this is that. But once again, they're so deeply immersed in the rote memorization technique that they go back and memorize this again, and their teachers are not doing much things that are different. So they continue with a lot of gaps in concepts. So if you have a physics teacher who has done a BSc in physics and a BEd in physics, he or she would have basic fundamental gaps in what they're learning. then they become teachers, right? Because you're recruiting from the same group. And we notice this clear difference, especially in rural areas. So in Chamarajanagar in Karnataka, where we've been working for a while, teacher vacancy is not a problem. Because for whatever reason, I think there was a minister from Chamarajanagar district who was an education minister. So he really focused on hiring from the local villages, which is great. Because you don't have a vacancy problem. People are from those villages. They're not wanting to go off to the cities all the time. But great. But the problem is the quality has suffered because they come from the same villages themselves. They've gone through the same poor quality education. So then they are already having a lot of doubts themselves. They're not able to clarify the doubt. They don't have access to a library themselves. They don't have access to people they can talk to. So they end up saying, okay, we are just going to do the same thing. We will teach the way we learned. We learned by memorizing things in the next textbook. We will teach the other kids the same way. So they become teachers and they follow the same memorization method. So we get into this vicious cycle. The next generation, we're going to have the same thing, but the teachers are coming through the same system as well. So the teachers are afraid. When I've talked to teachers, what I hear is, oh, teachers are afraid of questions in the classes because they don't understand the gaps, the concepts themselves. They don't understand how electricity moves across a wire, for instance. And why do we get a light when we switch on, when we turn a light switch on? How does the light bulb know that you have turned on the light switch? How is that message, that signal moving? But these are questions we have discussed with the teachers, and they're really afraid of the students asking them these questions. So they just follow the memorization method because it works for them. And then finally, the exam system is completely marks focused. There's not much we can do at this point about that. But that also means that they just memorize and they're just regurgitating in the exams. So what has happened is because of the teacher quality and the teacher perception and the vacancy and all of that, there has been a march towards privatization. So I looked up some numbers in preparation for this. What I found was in Karnataka, I mean, this I knew anecdotally, but the numbers were interesting. So if you look on the left here in Karnataka in 2003, these were the total number of children in government schools, the first bar here. And the second bar is the total number of children in private schools. And here, this bar, the third bar here is the total number of children in rural government schools. And then you have the total number of children in rural private schools. Not surprisingly, there are fewer rural private schools than there are private schools in cities. Because there's an expense and the parents might not be able to pay the fee. So there are fewer private schools in rural areas, not surprisingly. So, okay, the total number, so you can see that the majority of children in total and in rural areas are going to government schools. Now, fast forward to 2017, you see here that the number of children, total number of children in government schools and in private schools are almost equal. I think it's like at 46-47% of all children in Karnataka now attend private schools. And in the rural areas too, it's catching up. Rural areas still, the number of children attending private schools is still low compared to the total number of children in private schools, but it's catching up. So children are en masse being moved from private government schools into private schools. So I looked up Bihar just as an example of another state. And here the numbers were quite interesting as well. So in 2003, you had, this is a total number, the first bar here is the total number of students attending government schools. And then you have very few, as a fraction, in proportion to that, very few children attending private schools, and in rural areas it was even smaller. So fast forward to 2017, you still have a huge number of children attending government schools. But the number of children attending private schools is slowly creeping up. This is slowly creeping up. So one would expect from this that because why are parents doing this? Because since the economy opened up in India, like again 20 years ago, there has been a clear buy-in from parents that if the child gets an education, it really puts them on the path for a better life. So they're very excited about doing that. They want to do that. They're highly motivated to send their children to school. This was not really the case before. When I joined Asha, we would be doing things like we had to create awareness of education and so on. And that, for the most part, I think is really is gone now. So there's a demand for a better school system. So these private schools have been growing. So, but still in Bihar, there's still a huge number of children going to government schools. But what is interesting is if you look at some reports, and there are many different kinds of private schools. If you look at some reports, the low-cost private schools do not do better than the government schools. There is a perception that low-cost schools are better, but I think that's a topic for a different session. So right to education, just want to highlight this as well. There is a provision to enroll students in private schools. So if you live in a urban slum area, you're likely to have a lot of good schools surrounding you. And these private schools, good private schools surrounding you. And these private schools are required by law to admit 25% to make available 25% of all seats for poor children in the area. And some groups have become very good at using this, like Dalit activist groups and so on. They really created programs to motivate Dalit parents to apply for these slots. They help them apply for these slots and so on. And this has been working well. There's actually a successful Asha Stanford project, which I think we should look at some point in this series. So at least in the urban areas, again, there is an option that they can, because it's a little bit like the voucher system here, right? You're paid, the government covers the cost, and the kids have to go into this private school. So what all this has meant in terms of where we are today is we have a completely tiered system. We always had a tiered system. It's just that the number of private schools is growing at a very fast pace. You have at the top the international schools or public schools. I haven't figured out why they call them the public schools, because they're not really funded by the government. These are private schools. When you like things like the Delhi public schools, right? That's a private school. We have the Mysore public school. It's like a fashionable name to use. These are private, and by unaided I mean no aid from the government. They are extremely expensive in the sense they're like 6 to 10 lakhs per year. They're really for people who are working in IT in India, or like parents who are making 1 or 2 lakhs per month. I mean, that's kind of the, I think, demographic there. Then there are a whole range of schools for the middle classes, everything from completely private and unaided to government aided. Government aided used to be a good system. What government aided means is government funds your teacher salaries. But you run the school, a private organization or I think it has to be non-profit. A non-profit organization runs the school. But that has become a complete business in itself, which is why I'm lumping them with the private unaided schools. And that's, again, a whole other topic of what's happening in those schools. But there's a whole range of middle classes and schools starting from maybe 5,000 a year to 2 lakhs per year. And as you go up, as the cost goes up, the schools do get better. I mean, money cannot buy everything, but it does buy things like good teachers, it buys a good library, it buys good trips to other places, it does buy more things. And the cheaper schools are where where the poor end up sending their children. That's the only thing they can afford. They are not, their education quality tends to be lower than the government schools, which are free. But there's a perception that private schools are good, partly because there's an English medium private school, partly because they have a school bus, and they have a nicer uniforms with ties and all of that. And then, okay, parents are fooled into thinking that these schools are better. Then, of course, you have the government schools at the bottom, which are completely taxpayer-funded. Not only free tuition, there's a free midday meals, which there's a lot of research to show this has really helped enrollment as well, because parents are happy to send their children to get one good nutritious meal per day, free uniforms, free books, and so on. So what do Asha project partners do in this landscape? So typically, Asha project partners are people like us, right? They see that the local schools are not working well. Like, why are we with Asha? Why are we spending this time on a Sunday morning listening to this? Right? We want to do something. We want to help. We see the poverty, we see the challenges, and we want to help. Similarly, the project partners feel that, okay, yes, the government school is not working well, let's do something about it. And then they start seeing what they can do, and there are a number of initiatives that they come up with. I do want to highlight this, that Asha, as far as I understand, I forgot, I meant to check the latest numbers. So as far as I understand it, Asha does not receive many proposals from some states. It does not receive many from Kerala. I believe the only projects we fund in Kerala are for some tribal areas in Kerala. We don't also receive that many proposals from Himachal Pradesh, because Himachal Pradesh has done a massive turnaround. I think from at the time of independence, the literacy rates were very low. They've moved now that I believe the literacy rates are in the 90 percentile, and they've really done very well. And they're, from what I can read, I've not been there, from what I can read, it seems to be all motivated. So it's largely because of community ownership. I think the social structure is a little different. It's not so hierarchical. So they are able to, this is from a reading, so they're able to come up with good community oversight structures that would demand their politicians, their elected officials for good school systems. So some of these things are lacking in other states. So Himachal Pradesh, by all accounts, is doing very well. I know we have some projects in Himachal Pradesh, but I think they tend to be around science learning and things like that. Project partners understand that socioeconomic status, the only way to a better socioeconomic status is through education. So our project partners, just like we started Asha for education, Asha project partners want to do something. So what happens is they say, okay, let's start a school for folks who cannot afford private schools. So that's kind of where people like us come in. So here are some of the initiatives, right? They either start a school, or you start after-school study centers, or you start programs to send children who have dropped out back to school because of the school quality and other issues. Enrollment is at nearly 100% in almost across the country, and definitely in the South. And after a while, kids drop out for various reasons, and then there is initiatives to send them back to school and cover the gap and so on. So these are all things Asha projects try to do to help the children get educated. And I'm not against starting schools per se. I mean, as I was saying, that there are so much infrastructure and so much funding with these schools that I feel that Asha should really focus on other things like after-school study centers and so on. But at times it is necessary to have schools, because there are schools, there are needs for children who are extremely marginalized, students with disabilities. Our government school system doesn't really provide well for that. Students in very remote tribal areas, for example, students with some kind of societal stigma. I think Asha has had projects where the children of parents or fathers who have gone to jail, who had to go to jail, and then maybe it's school for their children, school for children who have whose parents have AIDS. So these are all social stigmas. Children who are in migrant families. So lots of parents will migrate to seasonally. They'll go work in the brick kiln for a while, then they'll come back home, and this really disrupts the child being in school. So there are so many categories of students where we have to build schools for, but otherwise we really have to think whether starting a school is the best thing to do. Project partners like to do it because it is one way to solve the problem. Some projects try to improve government schools, and hopefully in a future session I can talk about the different initiatives that we have done there. But again, the reason for Asha project partners exist because the government school system has primarily not succeeded in the way we would have liked it to have succeeded. And now there's a patchwork of privatization going on, and there's a big march towards privatization, which automatically means that parents who are poor cannot afford it. So we need, charitable organizations who kind of cover the costs for poor parents. That's kind of the way I see the education landscape. So just to kind of summarize, educated workforce definitely fuels economy. So I think it's hugely important to have equitable access to education. It remains the best path for individuals to escape generations of oppression and poverty. And there are many more good reasons for that: awareness, gender equality, and so on and so forth. So I find the fact that our government system has failed or is not succeeding as well as it should in India to be a deeply troubling thing. I'm also deeply troubled by the kind of the march towards privatization. And in some ways we are helping it, right? Because we are funding schools for poor children rather than try to encourage the communities to demand better schools from their elected officials. We have tried those projects as well, and again, we should look at that in a future series. We have tried projects where they're trying to empower the community, and it is hard to do as a non-profit, is kind of my conclusion. So finally, we cannot let these children suffer while these larger problems are being fixed. So we support children to go to school. We support NGO-run schools and NGO-run study centers, etc., etc. So that brings me to the end of what I wanted to say. It was longer than I expected, and I apologize for that. If you have any questions, we can discuss here, or feel free to reach out to me afterwards. I'm very passionate about this topic. I'm happy to engage in any discussions. If you would like me to speak to a chapter via a session like this, happy to do that as well. I hope it gave you kind of a good overview of where we are and why Asha for Education needs to exist.
Thanks, Melli. So, are there any questions? I see.
Hi,
Yeah.
Hi, this is Balaji from Asha, Bangalore, and I live out of India, and I steward one of the projects in the Dharmapuri district in Tamil Nadu. So thanks for the presentation and many of the insights from your various site visits and stewardship over the last 2 decades was very helpful, and it was very useful information. It was great listening to you. Just wanted to add a few things, from what you have shared during the presentation. First thing is, when you talk about the general education scenario in India, I don't know how much it is different in other countries. One of the biggest issue in India when it comes to education as propagated by the government is that education is, by constitution, education is in the concurrent list. That is, it is one of those subjects where the central government as well as the state government have a say in it. Now, this dichotomy is actually a pretty complex thing to deal with. So what happens is, central government runs institutions parallel to state government. A classic example is this Kendra Vidyalaya, NCERT, and Navodaya Vidyalaya is another example. When they try to do these things, they actually end up competing with the state and make the state government schools look inferior due to lack of funding. Because now most state governments don't raise that much tax revenues as central government anymore because of the new system we have. So what happens is this fundamentally actually kills any prospect of state governments directly being answerable to education in the respective states. The other problem that we had is recently, they introduced NEET, the NEET exam. That's the education eligibility test. What it did was, when you centralize the medical education all over the country, a state like Tamil Nadu, which significantly invested in medical education, now finds itself in a shape where the students from Tamil Nadu are not able to get admission into medical colleges, and the students elsewhere are able to come into it. I think there was a High Court judgment which some of you would have been witness to in the last week, when it emerged that 99% of those who clear the NEET exam and join medical colleges have gone for professional coaching. So you think about this, Tamil Nadu has medical colleges in at least 20 places in the state, but the NEET exam is held in less than 12 centers in Tamil Nadu. So that's automatically creates a disparity in the state, and then it's because of the interference of the central government. So fundamentally, I think our issue is a little messed up because there is no clarity between what is a state subject and what is a central subject. Both of them are into it, and both of us are messing it up. That's one of the big problems. Second thing you said about the spending on education is 3% in India. Yes, pretty much true. And this is, from this 3%, I doubt a significant amount of money actually goes into the direct education as such, because there's a whole lot of institutions that actually are not directly related to education in the sense, but they have all been clubbed into education. So the government wants to start some, let's say, a national research institute into something in the animal husbandry. Now it can go under animal husbandry department, but it will be pushed under the education department, and many such institutions have gone into education without actually contributing to education. The other part that I would like to introduce is a major part here these days that's happening is education has become a differentiator among different classes of the society. this is a serious issue that I at least find in this state very common. That is in Tamil Nadu, that people don't want to send their children to certain institutions because they want to spend more than what they can, and to prove a point that they are getting their children educated in a certain institution. It's not because these institutions give some better value for money or make their children any better. That's an unfortunate thing that's happening. I'll give you a very example that from what I observed. Like, I used to work for a manufacturing firm until few months back. They were running a pretty decent school in the same vicinity, okay? And right from the shop floor worker to the topmost guy in the company, none of them.
Did we lose Balaji?
Yeah, looks like his audio dropped out. Hello, Balaji?
Yeah. Let me just touch upon a couple of points you made, right? The education state being concurrent, I think he's right. But the reason was, I think, a good reason when they started off with. Yeah. So the reason because was we are a very diverse country with many different languages, for example. So states, if you have in Karnataka, if you're running a Kannada medium school, it cannot really be effectively run by the center. That is why education is a concurrent topic, that the states have to have some influence and some control. What he raised, other was an interesting point, because of the new GST tax, if this impacts the revenue of the state, it is further going to impact the schools in the state. So that is something that is very concerning as well, because the funds available will go down further. And I also agree with all the perception. I was touching upon a couple of issues with English medium is attractive, school bus is attractive, and parents just think that when there's a fee-paying school, it is better than other schools. And we are absolutely getting into a tiered system. There is no question that the more money you have, the more you want to pay in fees, thinking you're getting a better education. And in some cases you do, because money can buy a few things. And the tier system is very dangerous, because education will become difficult for education to be a way to reduce inequality or to help people move out to more opportunities. Because the poor will only go to the poor schools or the free schools. The rich will go to the rich schools. And this is a problem.
I'm sorry, I think I got muted.
Hi, is it Balaji again?
Sorry about that. Yeah, it's Balaji again, sorry.
Yeah, I can take your example.
That's the second point I wanted to do it. And the third point, I thought we could share. See, the trend of parents getting associated with education is increasingly diminishing. Even in the school that I work with, they try to create this parent-teacher association. It's a very freshly started school that we've been running for the last 3 years that I'm stewarding. There is a complete disassociation with the parents. Like, they decide once the children is put in the school, it's like a factory where they come out with whatever flying colors by tomorrow morning or something like that. So that is a trend that I don't know how, as Asha, we can take the message down to parents, saying that they should also take equal responsibility over education. This should happen in either in some of the non-formal schooling setup, where we can introduce this as a part of the evening school, where parents are also allowed to join their children in certain sessions and classes, and those type of institutions they can give a try. That's
So yeah, Balaji, I agree completely actually, and it's been tough. I don't know of any successful Asha project that has done this well. I think there are inherent problems in the way an NGO is sitting outside. You can't really bring about change. We should look at it. So my hope is that as part of the series, we should look at Asha. Silicon Valley had a project for many years in northern Karnataka to try to do something. I think we should look at what happened and why it has not continued, why it failed or did not continue. And we should look at states like Himachal Pradesh. I have read it. I have not been there, but as far as I can read, Himachal Pradesh seems to have succeeded in some ways, right? We should look at states that have succeeded. Kerala, by all accounts, is better for various other reasons too. So we should look at what has worked and see whether we can replicate that. I think we might have lost Balaji again. Any other questions, thoughts?
Yeah, it might be.
So Melli, I mean, thanks for a fantastic presentation and summary of all your experiences and a very dedicated work. So one thing I would like to bring in is one point I would like to make is in India, problem is, I guess, the education is very, means education as a policy is very centralized. I mean, and India is a very complex country, as we know. Each state has its own language and culture, and so having that trickle down effect is not working. I mean, we have to have a decentralized policy, and not even, I would say, state level, but even lower than that, the entities should be empowered, kind of, so that they have more control over the what kind of education, what quality of education, and you know, I mean, that will help in spreading the this movement, kind of.
Agreed. Yeah. I think it has to come from the people, like Himachal Pradesh seems to have shown. They have to drive it, right? They have to demand that their schools have to work well. But yeah, I don't decide. I definitely agree with that. And like you said, India is a very diverse and complex country, and education can mean different things in different places.
Right.
Any other comments? Questions? So I'm really glad we're having this series. I think it's really helpful to have all of these discussions and kind of talk to the larger Asha-wide community, not just to our chapters. And I think if you're interested in discussing any of these topics, like today or later, any of topics come up in the chapters, I would encourage you to reach out to the organizers, and I'm sure we can do also chapter-specific sessions. If you want to see how this applies or impacts any one of your projects, I think we would be very happy to be involved with that and to have those discussions with you.
Thank you, Melli, for the talk. If I think we are just 10 minutes from the 1 hour time, so if there are no other questions, we can end this call now. And all the slide decks and videos, the Central Projects team will send it out.
Since we have some time, I have a question, Melli. SV is looking to pick up new projects for next year, especially in this space where the project partner works with the government school to help improve the quality of education. So from your experience, can you say what kind of interventions have worked better?
That's a good question. So the interventions broadly fall into three categories, I would say. One is straight appointment of teachers. Right? You just appoint extra teachers, and that almost always has an impact, because just having more teachers and teachers that Asha has some direct control, I mean, Asha's project partner has some direct control over training, that usually helps. So if you're having 2 teachers in a school, you have 5, you appoint 3 more teachers, so that's helpful. That's kind of one category. The second category is, I'll put that all in a common bucket of infrastructure improvements, right? Adding toilets where we have not had toilets, those has been helpful too, though that is less and less needed now, I think. Adding libraries, which I think is a no-brainer for something like Asha, because it is low cost, it is not that expensive, but where we have tried to do it, we have felt that we have to create the culture of reading. What happens is sometimes we will find libraries in the school and the books kind of get locked in a cupboard, and then nobody ever looks at them again. So the teachers have to realize and understand the value of reading. But I think that can happen, that can be encouraged. So I feel that's like a very low-hanging fruit for us. I think we should just kind of start finding libraries. And the other thing that I've personally been involved with is kind of around science labs, having mobile science labs and having training for teachers around that. So I'm putting all of that in the infrastructure category. The third category is community empowerment. And this is where we have not succeeded, like we have just discussed. And Asha SV had a project over 10 years ago, and I was just talking to Padma about it recently, that we need to look at it and do a post-mortem as to what happened. So my understanding is when the project was running, it was doing well. The people began demanding their MLAs, elected officials, for better things. But after the project partner, which is SVYM, pulled out, things just stopped happening, is our understanding. But it's just been very hard. I think there are a lot of social reasons why it's very hard to intervene from the outside. So I would say these are 3 categories. In the first 2 categories, we've had some, I would say we had some degree of success. The challenge with the first 2 category, and in particular the first category where we are appointing teachers, is there's no real end in sight. Right. And that is where we have not simultaneously lobbied the government, and because project partners sometimes are not able to do that, right? What can we do that we have better appointed? We don't have teacher vacancies. That doesn't happen. And because I think NGOs are not really equipped to lobby. That's the conclusion I have come to. They don't demand. So it's a good project. It works well. It helps children, but there's no real end in sight. Even for the science one kind of projects also, there's no near end in sight, because in some cases we have had ways where labs have been built. So I am proud of some small accomplishments we have made in Karnataka in the resources category, where we were able to change the way teachers think. And we did that simply by encouraging teachers to become creative and critical thinkers themselves. Like again, in the science example, I was giving the example of people don't know how electricity moves in a wire. We got to a situation where the teachers were not afraid to ask us these questions. When I say us, I mean the project partner and everyone else who was involved. They began to be bold about asking questions, and they began to say, oh, okay, this is really interesting. Learning is fun. I didn't know learning could be fun. So they're able to take the teachers from learning is memorization to learning is fun, asking questions is fun, having discussions is fun. And once we get to that stage, some things begin to change, because we saw that in some schools, the teachers demanded the government to build labs, and they have been able to build labs in about 5 schools. And there's also some funding which comes to schools. The government gives 50,000 every year to the schools. So they're able to use that to build labs. So this to me is more sustaining and more permanent, because we are not continuously appointing teachers. The teachers themselves have changed and want to say that, okay, we want to have labs. The challenge with that has been that it doesn't really address the vacancy problem. The vacancy is a more complex problem. This demand from the local teachers has not been enough. Second, teachers get transferred. So we had this really good school going, really good maths and physics teacher, then they get transferred to somewhere else, and then things start going south in that school. So there are some challenges, but I think there are some characteristics, some parameters that we can identify in terms of what has been successful. So it's a longer answer than I intended to give. I hope that was helpful.
This is again a thought. I mean, further to Vidya's question, which interventions work and which don't, and I mean, if we can systematically collect statistics from different projects and different chapters, then will that give any future indication?
Yeah, I think we have to look at this is one of my long-term projects. I am personally, as you might have realized, I'm particularly passionate about government schools. So how can we improve that? So we have to sit and study this. We have not studied the different interventions, both statistically and both qualitatively. We need to sit and compare and see how the different systems have worked and where we have failed. We have kind of failed with Karnataka with the project, with the community empowerment project. I think we should do that. The second thing we should do is we should understand Kerala, we should understand Himachal Pradesh, we should understand Delhi. Delhi, I believe, is investing a lot. Now, they have moved there. I think they're investing 25% of their GDP in Delhi state schools. But I don't get the feeling that they're doing it the right way, right? I think a lot of money is going into infrastructure. Some teachers have been sent abroad for training. It's not clear to me that teachers have to be sent abroad for training. There are a lot of good resources in India. But I think one has to study that more. But I think we need to look at these models as well, both within Asha and outside of Asha. How have some states been able to turn this around?
Yeah.
So from Asha's perspective, I think there's actually all of us in Asha, right? We like to see when change can be permanent. And that's why I said changing the mindset of the teachers, to me, is one way of making it permanent. But that has its own challenges. The easier approaches is, like I said, to just appoint teachers or appoint this, add libraries. So these are things that Asha would continuously be involved in. But on the other hand, with most of our projects, we are continuously involved in them. So it's okay. At least that's my rationalization now.
I see.
Because I think I have also, after like almost 20 years, I've really come to understand the limitations of a non-governmental organization, the limitations of being outside the system. We are not the education minister. There's a lot more things we can do. We were in that position. We are not, right? We are on the outside. So there's only so many things I think we can do. Thank you for the lots of good questions. I'm happy to choose engagement, and I think we should really continue the discussions on this and various other topics.
Thank you.
Thanks, Melli. I think it's 9 o'clock now, so are there any other questions? Otherwise, we can take any remaining questions offline, and there will be one more project talk series in next month. It's going to be every second Sunday of the month. We will send out topics and announcements as we get closer to the day. So the next one will be held on 8th of December. And thank you everyone for attending today's talk. And thanks, Melli, for the talk.
Thank you for organizing. Thanks, everyone.
So the deck will be available?
Yeah, it will be on 8th December unless the speakers are not able to do that, but I will send a email out closer to the date, closer to 8th December, confirming
I think the question was whether the slide deck would be available. Yeah, we'll make the slides available.
Oh,
yeah.
sorry. Yeah, yes.
I mean, today's presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll make it, we'll send it out.
I'll send it to you, Shashi, and you can post it wherever. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.